Welcome back to the Public Rail Now podcast. As always, I'm your host, Adam, and I'm very excited to have Professor Richard Wolff back on the program to talk about monopolies, the Union Pacific-Norfolk Southern merger, corporate power in politics, the labor movement, and much more. To learn more about Professor Wolff's work and Democracy at Work, please visit democracyatwork.info. I can't recommend Democracy at Work enough. The work they do is incredible and so important. And if you're passionate about our mission to build a rail system that puts the people before profit, please consider donating to the campaign or even becoming a monthly sustainer. You can learn more about our campaign and find ways to support our work at our website, publicrailnow.org. Thanks for listening. All right, Professor Wolff, thank you so much for coming back on the Public Rail Now podcast. I am really excited to talk to you. There's so much to talk about. And I really want to get your thoughts on the Union Pacific-Norfolk Southern merger, since it appears to be, as critics of the merger suggest, a move towards monopoly in an industry that already operates as a cartel. But to start us off, before we get into that specific merger, I want to ask you about monopolies in general. Everyone in the United States, from the time they're little, hears about monopolies. They might have played the game Monopoly. They might know a little bit about trust busting and whatnot. And the term monopoly, justifiably so in a lot of cases, has negative connotations. So what is it that drives industries towards monopolization? And why do we see firms moving in that direction? And where does this bad reputation come from?
Okay. Let me try to summarize. That's a big issue that you've raised. It's a very important one. You're right to raise it. But given the limits of time, let me be comprehensive and a little bit historical. The capitalist system that has been dominant in the world over the last several hundred years has in it, as we all know, the so-called competition. The fact that it is relatively easy most of the time for businesses to start up in a new industry as it emerges. Let's say, automobiles, as we transition from horse and buggy to the automobile, we had 30, 40, 50 car companies. And that kind of multiplicity of competing enterprises is normal. And indeed, in economics, it is often stressed how good that might be because each of the competing companies tries to outdo the other one, and along the way achieves cost reductions and efficiencies and all of that. And much of that is true. But what it leaves out is equally true, that the whole thrust of competition is to produce winners and losers. Some of the companies survive and grow, and the others fade. If I asked you to mention the names of the 20 or 30 automobile companies in the United States that failed along the way, you couldn't probably do it unless you were a history buff, because they're out of our heads. What we remember are the ones who won: General Motors, Ford, Chrysler, et cetera, et cetera. And this situation in which the competition we celebrate destroys itself by its very function, how it operates, we know from history that the winners in the competition usually absorb the losers. That is, the automobile company that goes out of business because it can't compete successfully sees its workers migrate over to start working for the company that won the competition. They likewise see the winner in the competition buying the used equipment of the loser. And in that way, we see many become few, and the few who win the competition become big. Last point. When there are only a few left, there's a word for that in the history of capitalism. It's called oligopoly. That's when you have only a small number, 4 or 5 companies left in an industry. And when there's only one left, we call it monopoly. And the reason those have been so important is that the competitors along the way, in order to not be competed out of existence, to survive and grow, often priced things at or below cost, took a year or two of losses as the necessary price to pay to win the competition. And then once they've done that, they make up for whatever losses along the way by jacking up the price. Why? Because they're now the monopoly. They're the only one left. So if you're going to buy whatever it is they sell, you're going to have to meet their price, and they jack up the price, not just to the cost of production and not just to the cost plus a normal profit, but basically as high as they possibly can, because they don't have any competitors to work about who might not choose to do likewise and who might therefore steal their customers. So the question for our first transcontinental mega merger, if I understand the current one in the railroad business, is that whatever they've done along the way, now that they're the only one who can seamlessly move everything across the country every which way under one corporate umbrella, there is a definite historical basis for them to overcharge a lot along the way and to take advantage of their situation. Indeed, it would be very strange if by some weird development that I don't know about, they would be acting any different from the way other capitalist industries have acted over the centuries that we have seen this process play out over and over again.
And the U.S. government has, at least in some capacity, taken measures against monopolies from forming. There's the Sherman and Clayton Acts.
Right.
I think a lot of folks that know about the 1911 cases against Standard Oil and the American Tobacco Company and so on. And with the railroads, it's a wildly different story because the railroad industry is exempt from antitrust laws. A lot of people, I don't think, know that. But before we actually get into that, these firms are, even outside of the railroads, are able to operate effectively in the U.S. as monopolies or oligopolies in all but name. And we can also think to another famous case, U.S. Steel in 1920. Even though it controlled 60% of the iron and steel market, it was found that they weren't attempting to become a monopoly. So it's notoriously hard to prove that monopolies are being formed. And so, in your mind, what problems does the government run into when trying to actually impose regulations, and how do these corporations circumvent the kinds of regulations that are in place to prevent them from becoming monopolies?
Let me respond, but ask your indulgence to push back a little bit against you on just one point. I wouldn't start the story by asking what the government does, because the government has only usually come in at the end of the story. It's not been the beginning, it's not been the initiator of anything. What we have instead is almost always that the push against monopoly or monopolization or oligopoly and oligopolization has come either from the mass of consumers on the one hand, or on the mass of business buyers of the monopolist output on the other. And you can see it in the case of steel. If you raise the price of steel, you are going to be squeezing the profits of every company that uses steel as an input, because they're going to have to foot the bill. They're going to have to pay these outrageous prices. The same is true with petroleum. The same is true with electric current. The reason we have electricity and utility commissions in every one of the 50 states, the way we have insurance commissions likewise, are because those industries at various points were monopolized, and they jacked up the price which squeezed the profits out of the everybody who buys electricity, every company that buys it, or every company that buys insurance. And the same applies to the consumer, to the mass of the working class in their capacity as consumers. They begin to realize that these prices are crazy. Let me remind you, a few months ago, and by the way, it's becoming a problem again. We all were exercised, or most of us were, by something weird going on when we bought eggs. The price of a dozen eggs went through the roof, double, triple, quadruple, overnight with no visible cause. Oh, sure, the companies that do this aren't stupid. They know that when they play this monopoly game, which they all seek to do, and it's not that they seek it because they're bad people, it's because it's built into the system. The competition, you have to win it or else you're going to lose it. There's no middle ground here. You've got to fight so that you're the one left standing in the monopoly position instead of your competitor. So you end up in that position. You've had some costs to get there. So now you want to recoup and you do your monopoly, but you're not stupid. So you don't say, hey, I'm going to operate a monopoly. You come up with some excuse, very common in the defense of monopoly. You can see it when they go to court. They have endless Let me use the egg example. We had bird flu. Sure, we did. But if you did the research, you could see right away there's no necessary link between those two. It is something that the PR people they hired came up with to make it look less implausible, less what it really is, and more something out of the control, and therefore not to be blamed executives and major shareholders who were in fact behind it all. I would fully expect, if this merged railroad does the monopoly two-step as its dance, it will come up cleverly with PR to make you think it's anything and everything, domestic, foreign, whatever they can think of, to justify what they're doing and to keep what? To keep the government off their back. Because what the businesses that are hurt when a monopoly shapes up, or the consumers that are hurt when that happens, what they eventually do is go to the government, as you rightly point out, to try to get the Sherman Antitrust 1890, the Clayton Act early in the 20th century, and all the other steps. Kennedy coming down on the steel companies, and all the rest of it. Those are the acts of the government when it becomes politically too hot for them to ignore. Then they do something.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'm really glad you pointed out that there's this idea, I think, that a lot of these capitalists and these major companies, that there's something immoral about how they're acting. And really, they might be bad people, they might be good people, but it's the actual mode of production itself that is making them behave in a particular kind of way.
And I've had to, in my life, I've been around a while, I've had to sit down with other unions and other concerned people and try to persuade them there's no point in getting angry at, for example, this CEO, let's call him Mr. Jones, because even if you're successful and you get him fired, Mr. Smith, who comes right after him, is going to be in the exact same situation, and 99 times out of 100 is going to do pretty much the same thing, because the shareholders and the executives and everybody who's been in the industry in a while is all wrapped up in how that industry works. And that's your problem. You are, I don't mean to make you any less militant in what you're doing, but you are coming up against the way this system works. And you're now seeing a late chapter in that book when there aren't that many railroads left and two of the bigger, older, established ones take the next step heading into what we have seen in one or another. Let me give you also another dimension that you be aware of. Besides arguing that something external explains why they're a monopoly, the monopolists have also, over the years, developed an elaborate series of arguments intended to show either that there are good results of their monopoly, or if there aren't necessarily good results, it would be very bad and disruptive if you did anything to mess with them. In other words, they're telling you we are guiltless for having done it, plus you'll get hurt if you interfere with our monopoly. You will suffer in various ways. There will be bad consequences because the whole world now depends on us and we deliver. And if you broke us up into 3 or 4 companies or whatever you might do, you bad government, it would be very disruptive and hurt these people and those people. This is an attempt to distract you from the hurt that monopolization itself does by pointing out that there will be some hurts if you break the monopoly up, which, by the way, there often are. You are not in the lovely position of saying, do what I want, it'll only have good results. That's very rarely true in life or in economics anyway. So don't let those companies kind of fool you. The basic thing most monopolists are after are the savings. When they put 2 companies together, they can fire people who are performing duplications of one another in the 2 companies. And that is at the most basic level, as well as at the highest and intermediate levels of the company. They're looking for the savings of consolidation on the one hand, and the ability to jack up the price on the other. Most of them anticipate being able to boost profitability both ways.
And there's this debate that sometimes emerges when people are talking about monopolies and how to handle these firms concentrating and whatnot and combining. On the one hand, there's this perspective that these massive corporations should be broken up into smaller firms, like when people used to say break up the banks. And
Right.
On the other hand, there's the thought that where monopolies emerge, they should be transformed into public institutions, public enterprises. And from the perspective of Public Rail Now, the idea of breaking up the railroads into a bunch of smaller railroad corporations seems asinine. And, we argue that such a critical and massive industry needs to be brought under public control and democratized, call it nationalization or whatever you'd like. But from your perspective, does one course of action, the breaking up or, the nationalization or what have you, does one course of action produce better outcomes than the other? Does breaking up the large firms into smaller firms actually solve the problem?
Okay, your question is excellent, and I'm going to give you the best answer I can. But before I do, let me explain to you that in the public work of being an active citizen of the United States or being historically educated, I have to tell you that issue has always been decided in this country based only on ideology, not on anything else. And anyone who suggests otherwise to you is either uninformed himself or basically looking to pull the wool over your eyes. It's not serious. A serious approach would do exactly what you said. It would sit down and it would try to weigh as best it could what are the costs and benefits of leaving the monopoly the way it is. That's one option. Breaking it up into smaller competing enterprise. That's a second option. Or socializing or nationalizing it, as you put it. That's a third option. And the reason you would do that is because in many other countries, that's exactly what they did. That's why in many countries, railroads have been at one time or another nationalized. They sat down and they did that. And the reason they did it is because, unlike the United States, they were not ideologically conformist. They had a much broader range of ideological, or if you like it, political or value systems, whatever you want to call it. And so they could sit down, look at the alternatives, measure them as best they could, and make a decision as rational as one can in any such situation. That's never been done in this country. We have ruled out ideologically. And really, this is when ideology should change its name, for better or worse, and be called religion, right? This is a religion in the United States. That having the government take over something and run it is somehow intrinsically bad, not to be done, the last resort, only temporary, whatever phrase you want, but to rule it out. So we're left with what you yourself just said. We could break it up, which seems ridiculous since all that will do is resume the competition that got us to this place in the first place. It's like a rerun of a movie whose ending we know. So why do it? But the alternative that you mentioned, and I want to congratulate you because it means you're not as caught up in this religion ideology as most people are, is to ask the obvious question. And let me again remind you, every one of the 50 states has an insurance commission. Every one of the 50 states has a utility commission. Why? Because that's a kind of a halfway point to having the government take over. It means that people, and this often is the way it happened, in each state, whether it's Connecticut or Arizona or Michigan, doesn't matter, was so upset about the monopolistic behavior of the industry that they created a commission for, that they said, we will not allow that industry to operate unless the government has serious oversight control. That's why, in order to raise your electric rate or in order to raise your insurance premium, the industry, the companies in question, have to go before a commission, present their data, open their books, and prove to the commissioners that their costs are such that a reasonable 5% or 7% profit on top of that means that the insurance rates are capped at such and such, or the utility rates are, and so on. So you can see a grudging admission of the validity of your question right there. So I would say to you that it would be very smart strategically to go for nationalization. Now, it will provoke people, but that'll get you a lot of attention. And in where people are today, there's a level, and I'm telling you, I'm a personal barometer of it. There's a level of openness to questioning capitalism that I've never seen before in my life. I mean, I was born many years ago in Youngstown, Ohio, and I've lived and worked in the United States all my life. I've never seen the level of questioning that I see now. So you're at a better moment to raise that question than you've ever been. And I think you'll see much more sympathy for it, or for at least opening the conversation to include it, than you would have expected at any time over the last 50 years. And I really mean that. So, yeah, you should point it out that that is an option. If the government ran it, there'd be several things that you would avoid. Number one, not only would the government not be required or be driven to jack up the prices, but quite the opposite. It could allow the prices to diminish because a government enterprise is not a private capitalist enterprise. It doesn't have to make a certain level of profit. It has much more latitude. It can make no profit as long as it covers its costs. That's usually most of what the community asks. Don't be a burden, but you don't have to make a profit. You just have to make sure that the railroads are running and on time and all the rest of it. So you have much more latitude in all of that. And you would also be able to have political responsibility. Now the railroads would have to deal with the kind of risks. And here I'm thinking of Palestine and the wreckage that we are still living with. You know, railroads have an awful lot of latitude when it comes to maintaining the track, when it comes to keeping up with safety and all of the rest, making it publicly responsible, making the leaders aware that when something is going wrong, they're going to be held to account in a political way that is very serious. Not a small number of commissioners whom you can buy, but a whole population. There are all kinds of benefits from the nationalization that ought to be explored. And by the way, here's a piece of strength you can bring. You're not the first ones to do it. I can introduce you to people in Europe who have been publicly operating rail systems for many, many decades and who have all kinds of experience in how to do that in an efficient way. And so this is those societies have not imploded. They didn't blow up. Their railroads are, if you pardon me, in many ways better than anything we've got. I have been on the European railroads, and I can tell you uh, in France, what they call the TV, the TGV, train grande vitesse. In French, it means high speed. The high speed trains in Europe are a beautiful experience. You know, I've taken the Acela here in the Northeast Corridor, and not even close. So European railroads, and now increasingly Asian railroads, offer all kinds of models, all kinds of experience that we could draw from in this country were we to go in that direction.
Yeah, and in thinking about, you bring up ideology and this sort of idea, the government can't do anything right, and I think like a lot of that, it's been said before, it's the dominant ideology is the ideology of the ruling class, and in a recent episode of Economic Update, you talk about class warfare, and I wanted to talk to you about corporate power, and in my experience, if you ask anyone, regardless of where they live, for the most part, regardless of how they might identify politically, 9 times out of 10, they'll agree. Big business runs things, they control elections, and so on. And,
Right.
things that have been happening today really look like the Gilded Age. I mean, when I think of Jim Vena, the CEO of Union Pacific, not only going to Trump and trying to promote the Union Pacific Norfolk Southern merger, but also saying, hey, you need to send troops to Memphis. That sounds like something Jay Gould would would have done.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, you know more history than most of the people that I deal with in your references, to your credit. But yes, of course, none of this stuff is new. It's gross, it's upsetting, but it isn't new. And you kind of, in my more, how shall I put it, pessimistic moments, and I have them like everybody else, uh, I scratch my head and I say to myself, how many times do we have to go through these experiences before people get the message and realize that these parallels exist and what they mean? Yeah, it's very, it's very depressing on occasion. I have it in my classroom when I talk to young people all the time. Mostly people in their 20s and 30s, and yes, you're young. It takes time to learn this stuff. On the other hand, they're so smart in some areas. You kind of wonder why is it when it comes to these kinds of issues, they don't hold on to their smarts. What happens?
Right. And I think in one of the things I wanted to ask you as well in relation to that question is, do you think we've come to a new stage in the evolution of this mode of production capitalism, or is this more of the same? Is it like, because there's, in a lot of ways, it seems like this is history rhyming, but other times it does feel like we're on the verge of something we haven't encountered before. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have changed my mind. I think up until, well, I'm guessing 2 or 3 years ago, I probably would have answered your question uh, by saying it's more of the same. I don't believe that anymore. I now believe we are in a truly historic change. Now, I don't have I can't see the future any better than anybody else can, which is to say, I can't see it. So time will tell us. But I think we are now in a very, 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 very different place. I say this on my programs. I know it is difficult for people, particularly U.S. people, to get their heads around it. But it's the job of some of us to make the point, and we'll all see. But it's better to have it in your head than to not. And here it is. For the last century, pretty much since World War One, the United States has been the dominant economic powerhouse in the world. The US dollar has been the great global currency. The US produced more than anybody else did, traded more of it around the world than anybody else did, had a military with bases all around the world more than anybody else did, and on and on and on. And it's really only been recently that that is no longer the case. And I know it's scary, but I have to tell you that, I look at the numbers. I was taught here in the United States how to do that. I'm using the economics I learned here. I went to very fancy universities in this country, and I have all my degrees from them. Uh, I'm using the tools they gave me. The People's Republic of China is something new. It is a real powerful competitor. And we haven't had that as a nation for a century. And that competitor is not only gaining on us, it has already outpaced us in a number of very important industries, with a new one or two being added almost every day. I don't frankly see us catching up to them. That's the reality. And that makes everything different. That means we don't have the space, if you like, the freedom. We can't rely on the dominance we have because we don't have it anymore. And how exactly that plays out, I don't know. We're seeing it every day. Let me give you an example. About 15, 20 years ago, a competition begins around the world to develop an electric automobile, to stop producing automobiles that burn gasoline and use oil and all that, and that work instead on electricity. And here in the United States, we know that the first one to kind of do that effectively was Elon Musk and the Tesla Corporation. And that's why he's the richest man in the world as I speak. So far, so good. We're all on the same page. But now I got to tell you that at the end of the 15 or 20 years, there is one company, maybe two, who have developed by far the highest quality, cheapest electric cars and trucks in the world. And it is not Tesla. It is one or two Chinese companies. The most effective one has the three English initials in its name, BYD. Actually stands for the words build your dream. That's how important America is. It comes up with the words, but the car, the truck, are Chinese. So dominant is it that a few months ago, when I was in Paris, France, and had the need to take a cab, I stepped into the cab, and there I saw, by looking on the dashboard, that it was a BYD Chinese car, that many of the cabs there are. Okay, do we have them here? No. You will not find, I don't believe, a BYD anywhere in the United States. Trump, in his first presidency, put a 25% tariff on them, and Biden, during his presidency, raised that to 100%, which is what it is now. So if you wanted to buy one of their good cars, their electric cars, and you paid, say, 30 grand for it, you'd have to send 30 grand to China to get the car shipped. But then when you went to pick it up from the dealer at the port, you'd have to give that dealer another 30,000, 100%, which he sends to Uncle Sam, which is the tariff. So the net cost to you for that car is 60 grand. So you're not going to buy it. Why? Because Tesla or GM or somebody else, Toyota, will sell you an electric car. Won't be as good, but it will be only, I don't know, $45,000 or something like that. Is that the end of the story? No. No, it's not. Why not? Because, think with me now, every American producer of anything, of ice cream cones, of software, of shirts, it doesn't matter, who uses cars and trucks, which is almost everybody, if they live in the United States, they've got to pay 45 grand for an inferior electric vehicle. Their competitor in Brazil or Belgium or Canada or anywhere, or no, not Canada, they have the same tariff. But in Belgium or Brazil, they can get a better car or truck for less money. We, by doing what we are doing for the immediate, we're protecting American car workers. But in the longer run, we are shooting ourselves in the foot. This is a fundamental change in our situation. So I have to answer the question, yeah, I see we're going to do all kinds of things with these tariffs that Mr. Trump feels like. And it may be good for him because his presidency has only got 3 more years to go, if that. But in the long run, for the United States, we are dying, we are losing. And that loss will be relentless, and it will follow us from one industry to another. Indeed, if you understand the example I just gave you, it is affecting every industry as I speak to you. We don't have the luxuries. And if we turn to having nationalized industries, which I think is what is coming, it will be as different leaders in this country. And by leaders, I mean working people every bit as much as the clowns we elect. is more leading people to begin to understand what it means that we're in a declining empire, what it means that the peak is behind us. That we don't do as an A. We require every president to tell us we're the greatest, bestest economy in the world. It's embarrassing. If you worked in an office with a character who talked like that, everybody would ignore him because he's sort of pain in the neck. We're acting like that in the world, and the rest of the world is noticing. They're not copying us. They're looking at us as the weird actor. And I have to tell you, they're right. And it's going to impact the railroad business. There's no way that it couldn't. And if you don't pay attention to it, if you don't bring it up, that's not smart. That's stupid. Because you may not be able to solve it, but you surely can't solve it if you pretend it isn't there.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up working people as leaders, and so I know we're almost out of time here, but I got to ask because a lot of my research and writing has to do with the labor movement. That's the movement that I come out of, and I know you talk about unions and the labor movement on your program a lot. And from what I'm seeing, it seems, of course, U.S. labor is in a difficult spot, and
Yep.
on the one hand, it seems that there's the AFL-CIO, the dominant labor federation. Um, it's almost paralyzed or stuck in some kind of delusional loop that business as usual unionism is still the order of the day. But on the other hand, unions are more popular than they've been in decades. It seems like workers are hungry to organize. But it's like there's a barrier preventing a new surge in militant unionism, maybe even something on the scale similar to the days of the CIO. So what are you seeing in the labor movement? And do you think there's potential for a new CIO-like eruption in the labor movement? And what would that mean for workers?
Well, the short answer is yes, 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 yes. I feel it. I see it all around me. When I first started doing this radio and TV show, Economic Update, uh, there were many times when I had no labor story to organize a segment of the show, 5 minutes or 8 minutes or so. Now I have more than I can handle. So I'm here to tell you, there's much more militancy than I expected to see or than I have seen at any time in the long decline of labor activity. It's a new generation. I must tell you, in all honesty, it is disproportionately among younger people. Although by younger I mean 40 and younger, not teenagers or something. Here's the story I would tell you. When you start a conversation with somebody who has a story to tell about a workplace, and then eventually, either that person or I bring up union. I used to have to face then, what should I call it? The popular image of a union, which is, top heavy with bureaucrats who don't understand much, who are more interested in the dues you're going to pay than in anything for you, who caution you against upsetting the employer. Endless stories like all of that, whose bottom line is, sure, yeah, there's nothing wrong with unions, but really no interest. I don't get that anymore. Now people are absolutely, union is one of the things. It's not the only thing. It's not that they think that unions are all the heroes up on a big white horse. No, but a union is not a bad thing. A union has difficulties associated to it, but they would much rather have one than not have one, and they're willing to fight for it if they're not alone. They need to see, and they're finding it. That's why we're seeing Starbucks and all the others doing what they're doing. So the bottom line is, yeah, I see it. Could it take the form of the CIO? There, I think I would have to, and I know this is controversial, but I think you'd have to see a real body blow to the American working class. You'd have to see them suddenly bounce out of their jobs. Well, let me give you an example. If the current hype about artificial intelligence is more than hype, and I think that's still an open question, but let's assume for the moment it's serious and businesses are really going to install it. And when they do, they're going to fire lots of people to boost their profits because they don't have to pay those people anymore. And the AI is cheaper than what they used to pay them. If that happens, and there are plenty of people who believe that is about to happen, you might see what I'm calling a body blow to the American working class. If you put that together with the militancy that has been building, particularly over the last 5 years in the labor movement, then yes, even a CIO could happen again. And then you have another prospect, which in the way is even more exciting. Because what was spectacular about the CIO in the 1930s was the fact that every kind of, how shall I put it, liberal, left wing, radical, whatever words you want, community organization, social organization, began to fall in behind the unions, began to see that by making the union strong, they would become stronger. And out of that labor community alliance, or whatever you want to call it, the whole country changed, and everybody got caught up in all of that. And I'm often asked to remind people, what could that win? And I answer them, I said, just look at your own history. We never had a social security system until that community alliance said to Roosevelt, the president, we want that, do that. If you do it, we'll make you the most popular president in the history of the country. And if you don't do it, we're going to bounce you out of this office. So we got Social Security and we got unemployment compensation and we got the first minimum wage and we got 15 million people hired as federal employees to build the national parks, to do the first ecological stuff. So don't tell me that that kind of an alliance can't be effective. It was effective. We're still benefiting from what they achieved at a time that's now almost 100 years ago. So, yeah, we could do it again. I don't say it's going to happen. It could happen, and it could change everything.
Professor Wolff, thank you so much again for coming on the program. And before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners? Anything coming out from Democracy at Work? And where can people go to learn more about Democracy at Work and support the work that you do?
Well, we do stuff every day, and it's in order to support the emergence of everything you and I have been talking about for the last 45 minutes. And everything we do can be found either on our website, democracyatwork.info, or on our Substack, which is democracyatwork.substack.com. And that's where we go. We do videos, we publish books, we have a regular radio TV shows, and it's all there, and it's all basically almost all of it for free. And that's why we do it, so that you can see it, read it, share it, make use of it. And as to what I would leave you with as a thought, I don't mean to scare folks when I talk about the competition from China and the BRICS nations. That is not necessarily a danger. It shouldn't be looked at. It should also be understood as an opportunity. If we had the kind of leadership our country needs, we would be sitting down with the Chinese and their allies to work out a way to live and let live. There's enough room on this planet, Lord knows, for us to do that. We don't need to be forever recovering from one war while we get ready for the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Professor Wolff.
My pleasure, and the best to you.